take a look at one of Donald Trump's cabinet picks, Senator Marco Rubio. Of all of Trump's choices for his foreign policy team, Rubio is the least controversial, that is, to the neoconservative foreign policy establishment, and Rubio is the most likely to provide continuity with all that is wrong with U.S. foreign policy, from the Middle East to Latin America to China. The only area where there might be some hope for ending a war is Ukraine, where Rubio has come close to Donald Trump's position, that is, praising Ukraine for standing up to Russia, but recognizing that the U.S. is funding a deadly stalemate war that needs to be brought to a conclusion. But in all the other hot spots around the world, Rubio is likely to make the conflicts even hotter or to start new ones. Let's take his obsession with regime change in Cuba. Like other Cuban-American politicians, Marco Rubio has built his career on vilifying the Cuban Revolution and trying to economically strangle the island. While he has said that his family fled Castro's revolution, his parents actually left Cuba before the revolution, during the U.S.-backed dictatorship of Fulgencio Batista. When President Obama came to power and decided to restore relations with Cuba in 2014, Rubio was a vocal critic. He claimed that easing of the U.S. blockade on Cuba will only strengthen the oppressive regime, and he pushed a policy of maximum pressure, which includes brutal sanctions that hurt the Cuban people and keeping Cuba on a bogus list of state sponsors of terrorism, a designation that cuts Cuba off from the entire international banking system. These measures destroy the Cuban economy and have led to a massive wave of migration in the last 2 years. So, here Trump has vowed to stem immigration, and his Secretary of State wants to crush Cuba's economy, forcing people to abandon the island and set sail for the United States. It's a lose-lose policy. Bad for Cuba, bad for the United States. The second problem with Rubio is that he will apply his anti-Cuba stance to the rest of Latin America. He's sided with the extreme right-wing politicians in Latin America, like Jair Bolsonaro when he was in power in Brazil, and Javier Milei in Argentina, and he opposes progressive ones, like Brazil's Ignacio Lula da Silva. He's also advocated for sanctions and regime change in Nicaragua. In Venezuela, he's not only promoted severe sanctions, but regime change plots to topple the government of Maduro. Rubio's major concern about Latin America now is the influence of China, which has become the leading trade partner of most Latin American countries. Unlike the United States, China focuses on economic benefits and not on internal politics, where American politicians like Marco Rubio see Latin America as the U.S. backyard. While Rubio's virulent anti-leftist stands have served him well in climbing to senior positions in the U.S. government and now into Trump's inner circle, his disdain for Latin American sovereignty does not bode well for U.S. relations with the region. Third problem with Rubio, he believes Israel can do no harm. Despite the massive death toll in Gaza and global condemnation of Israel's genocide, Rubio still perpetuates the myth that, quote, Israel takes extraordinary steps to avoid civilian casualties, and that innocent people die in Gaza because Hamas has deliberately used them as human shields. When we asked him in November 2024 if he would support a ceasefire, he angrily said, on the contrary, I want Israel to destroy every element Hamas they can get their hands on. These people are vicious animals. The few times in the past year that the Biden administration has tried to restrain Israel, Rubio has opposed those efforts. He even criticized the Biden administration's decision to sanction violent Israeli settlers linked to anti-Palestinian violence in the occupied West Bank. He said Israel has consistently sought peace with the Palestinians, and that Israelis rightfully living in their historic homeland are not the impediment to peace. The Palestinians are. It's hard to imagine getting any justice for Palestinians with Marco Rubio directing U.S. foreign policy. Another problem? Rubio's deep-seated hatred towards Iran. Rubio claims that the central cause of violence and suffering in the Middle East is not Israeli policy, but Iran's ambition to be a regional hegemonic power. He says that Iran's goal in the Middle East is to drive America out of the region and then destroy Israel. He's called for more and more sanctions on the people of Iran and believes that the U.S. should not re-enter the Iran nuclear deal, saying we must not trade away U.S. and Israeli security for vague commitments from a terrorist-sponsoring regime that has killed Americans and threatens to annihilate Israel. He says the U.S. goal should be regime change in Iran, which of course means war. Well, there will hopefully be leaders in the Pentagon who will caution Donald Trump about the perils of a war with Iran. Rubio will not be a voice of reason. Another problem with Rubio? He is beholden to big money, from the weapons industry to the Israeli lobby. The group Open Secrets, that reports on big money in politics, says Rubio has received over $1 million in campaign contributions from pro-Israel groups during his career. When he ran for re-election in 2022, he was the third largest recipient of funding from pro-Israel groups in the Senate. He was also the fourth largest recipient of funding from the weapons industry, getting over $666,000 during his congressional career. His support from these powerful groups make it unlikely that Rubio will ever challenge the Pentagon budget, U.S. militarism, or genocide against the Palestinian people. Another area where Rubio is dangerous, China. In 2022, he said the gravest threat facing America today, the challenge that will define this century and every generation, is not climate change, not the pandemic, not the less version of social justice. It is China. It will be hard for our nation's, quote, top diplomat to ease tensions with a country as so maligned. And on Taiwan, he's not only introduced legislation to increase military aid to the island, but he actually supports Taiwanese independence, a dangerous deviation from U.S. long-standing one China policy. And here at home, Rubio is also dangerous. He wants to crack down on our free speech. He describes campus protests against Israel as a complete breakdown of law and order. He's called for students speaking up in Palestine. He says they are a bunch of brainwashed anti-Semitic zombies. He supports Trump's plan to deport foreign students who engage in pro-Palestine campus protests. He falsely equates anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. And students are not Rubio's only target. He's called for the Justice Department to investigate 18 nonprofit groups, starting with us, CODEPINK. On each of these issues, Rubio has shown no sign of a commitment to diplomacy. Like Trump, his underlying attitude to foreign relations is the United States must get its way or else. That other countries that won't submit must be coerced, threatened, cooed, bombed, or invaded. This makes Rubio just as ill-equipped as Anthony Blinken to conduct diplomacy, improve U.S. relations with other countries, and resolve conflicts peacefully, as the UN Charter requires. So, get ready for some rocky times ahead, and get some comfy shoes for hitting the streets and protests. Let's hope Rubio's time in the White House is a short one.